Hello and welcome. This tutorial will show you how to create a basic flow using system automation activities and workflow activities to define a loop action and read into a directory. First, we will build a flow which will create a log file to write to. Later, we will access a file directory and read the files within it to check if they are empty or contain any content. The flow will be finished by writing into the log file, summarizing our results of which file was empty and which file contained text. To support this use case, I have created one folder with 3 text files, where 2 of them contain text and 1 is empty. There's also an extra folder where we will create a log file with the summary of our results. In order to build the RPA flow, we'll go to RPA Studio and create a new project. Let's first create the log file, where we will store the summary of the actions, file path, and the results of whether the file was empty or had any content. From the Activities side panel, drag and drop the Create File activity onto the canvas. Once selected, we can set up its properties. To do so, we'll create a few arguments in a variable. Arguments are the process variables, which once the flow is published, can be changed depending on where the flow will be running. Let's create the following arguments. For the target file name property, which should contain the name of the log file and the extension, let's create an argument log file name of type string and default value logfile.txt. For target file path, the path of the file where the log file should be stored, let's create a second argument, log file path, with the following default value location. And lastly, file output, for which we will create a variable instead of the argument. Variables are the RPA process dynamic variables created or referenced throughout the process, which shouldn't be changed no matter where the process is running. Let's name the variable output file path of with this type string. Now let's assign these variables to activity properties. We can now start reading the files in the directory. For that, let's drag and drop the Get Files in Directory property. For these activities, define the following values. The argument for the path property, which will hold the information the directory will access, let's call it path. The type should be string, and for the default value, the file path name. And the variable for the files property with an output files of the type list of string, since the output will contain the list of the file paths read in the directory. Now we need to create a loop so that the RPA process can read each of the access files in the loop one by one and perform an action. To do so, select the automation activity called ForEach and define its type property as string. Then, let's create a logic that for each item in the file list, which is represented by the variable files, we will read said file. In that case, we need a new automation activity called readTextFile, where the source file path property should be the item as we defined in the loop component, and for the output activity, create a variable text of type string. Also, we want our process to perform different actions depending on if the file has content or is empty. To do so, we need the if activity as a condition. In this property, we can define the if text, which is the read content of the file, as equal to an empty string and write the result into the log file. And to do that, we will use the append line activity. In the line property, we can define, for instance, the item, which is the file path, plus, quote, this file's empty, end quote, and for the source file path property, specify the output file path variable. Else, if the file already contains text, we can write it into the log file using append line by defining the line property as item plus, quote, this file has text, end quote, plus text. And we can use the same path as the previous activity. Now let's run the flow to see if it's working as expected. In the output page of the RPA Studio, you can check the logs to ensure the activities were executed without throwing any errors. The activity code is 200, so that means the execution was successful. Now let's confirm the log file was created successfully. As you can see, we have the list of the file path with the appended text. We can improve the flow by addressing one possible exception scenario, which is the possibility of a pre-existing log file. For that, we will use the activity PathExists, where the path is the output file path, and set the type to an argument rather than a variable, as the path can change depending on where the process is running. Thus, we can set the default value as the following path. For the isValid property, we will create a variable LogFileExists of the type Boolean. Now we need to add the condition activity if and the expression LogFileExists. If a log file currently exists, then the condition is true and no next steps should be made. If false, it will create a file. Since we already defined this condition, we will just move it into the false section of the if condition. Let's run the flow again to ensure the scenario in which a file already exists is addressed successfully. Now we can publish the flow to RPA management in the Infor OS multi-tenant environment. To do so, please follow our additional tutorial on how to publish an RPA flow into RPA management. So to conclude, during this tutorial, we walk through how to use multiple system activities such as get files in directory, create file, read text file, PathExists, append line, and a few workflow activities, if and for each. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial. If you wish to see more, check out our YouTube channel to find the latest content.